Imagine being the director of the FBI and still being thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and humiliated, all because of the color of your skin. This isn't fiction. It's the story of Darius Cole. And once you hear what really happened, you'll never see justice the same way again. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story. It is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The desert doesn't whisper, it roars. And on a bone-dry stretch of Highway 163, just outside Monument Valley, that roar wasn't coming from the wind. It was the rumble of injustice, disguised as routine, cloaked in flashing blue and red lights, and set to explode in the span of 10 minutes that would change everything. Darius Cole, a 44-year-old black man with the steely calm of a veteran and the burdened silence of someone who's lived too long with suspicion, was driving west under a sky slowly bleeding into dusk. His black SUV cruised steadily at 55 miles per hour. No music, just the faint thrum of tires against asphalt and the thoughts that tend to creep in during long drives through nowhere. He had just wrapped a federal summit in Denver, another win for community policing reform, and was heading back home to his family in Phoenix, to his teenage son, to the dinner waiting on the stove. He was an FBI director, a public servant, a protector of the law. But the law didn't recognize him that evening. In the rearview mirror, red and blue lights erupted without siren, slashing through the dimming light like a warning. Darius didn't flinch. He slowed, signaled, pulled over. His instincts, trained over 2 decades in federal service, told him to stay calm, to do everything right. Keep your hands visible. Don't move quickly. Speak clearly. The protocols weren't just rules for him. They were survival tactics, passed down like heirlooms in black families across America. He rolled down the window, letting the hot desert air crawl in. 2 officers approached, one on each side, their silhouettes made jagged by the setting sun. The lead cop's voice cracked like a whip. "Step out of the vehicle, now." No explanation, no request for ID, just command. "I'm happy to comply," Darius said, his voice level. "But may I ask why I've been stopped?" That's when the gun was drawn. Out, hands where I can see them. The second officer circled to the passenger side, one hand gripping his holster, the other flashlight blazing into Darius's face. The beam didn't search for contraband. It searched for weakness. Something in Darius shifted. Not fear. He had buried that long ago. Not surprise. He had seen this before, too many times. It was something colder, a hardening. Because even with his badge in the glove box, even with his ID in his wallet, even with the director title etched beside his name, none of it mattered here. The uniform had become armor for men like those two. But for Darius, his suit was just a target. His skin, a red flag. "I'm FBI," he said slowly. "Director Darius Cole. Badge in the glove compartment. Please don't—" The officer slammed him against the side of the SUV before the sentence could finish. His shoulder cracked against the door. A knee jammed into his spine. Then the handcuffs. Too tight. Intentional. "Funny how all y'all got titles when the lights go on," the officer muttered. It was supposed to be a traffic stop. It became an assault. And as the second officer stood back, not interfering, not objecting, just watching, Darius understood the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about mistaken identity or a bad judgment call. It was about power, and something told him they knew exactly who he was. What happened next isn't captured in body cam footage, because the body cams were off. But there's cell phone video from a tourist a quarter-mile back. It catches the end of it. A grainy, distant clip that shows Darius on his knees in the dust, blood at his temple, head held high, refusing to look down, defiant, dignified. And it shows the moment reinforcements arrive. 2 unmarked black SUVs tearing down the highway. The moment everything changes. Because within the hour, Officer Glenn Radisson, 16 years on the force, no prior suspensions, was in federal custody. And the story that would soon grip the nation was only just beginning. But in that first moment, on that lonely road, as sweat and blood mixed on Darius's brow, a larger question hung in the heat. What does it mean when even the most powerful black man in law enforcement can be brutalized with impunity? What does it say about a system where your title can't save you, but your silence might? And what happens when a man like Darius Cole decides not to stay silent anymore? This isn't just a story of a traffic stop gone wrong. It's the story of what happens when truth gets pulled over and decides to fight back. Stay with us. The road ahead is far from over. The air inside the Las Vegas FBI field office was heavy with unspoken tension. Though the building buzzed with the usual shuffle of agents, paper trails, and security detail, an eerie hush followed Darius Cole down every hallway. People glanced up from their desks, some offering nods of solidarity, others looking away, uncomfortable. No one quite knew what to say to the director who had, just 36 hours earlier, been pulled from his vehicle at gunpoint by 2 local officers who knew exactly who he was. Darius didn't want their pity. He wanted accountability. He sat at the head of the operations conference room, his brow slightly furrowed, a clean bandage taped above his right eye where his head had struck the hood. It throbbed every time he moved, but that wasn't the pain that kept him awake last night. It was the look in the second officer's eyes, detached, passive, as though watching a man bleed under fabricated suspicion was simply Tuesday night protocol. That indifference haunted Darius more than the brutality. Across from him sat Deputy Director Carla Nunez, flown in directly from D.C. Her presence was both a show of force and a silent message. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. She broke the silence first. Internal Affairs has initiated a federal investigation. Both officers are in custody. Their records, well, they paint a disturbing picture. Darius nodded, his expression unreadable. What kind of picture? Both have a history of excessive force complaints, mostly buried under lack of video evidence or redacted reports. One has ties to a local militia group. The other, she hesitated, was previously flagged in a DOJ oversight audit. No action was taken. The knot in Darius's chest tightened. It was what he expected, but it didn't dull the impact. This wasn't just about one stop. It was systemic, deep, and worse. It was familiar. I want their body cam footage released, he said, voice low but resolute. I want a press briefing within 48 hours. I want every incident they've been involved in reopened. Carla nodded. You'll have all of that, but you should know. Things are already moving fast. They were. By the time Darius had made it back to his hotel that night, a video taken by the tourists who witnessed the stop had already gone viral. It showed him being yanked from the car, blood staining the front of his suit, his calm voice clearly stating his title and role. The officer's aggression was undeniable. There was no spinning it. The country erupted. Hashtags trended within hours. News anchors on both sides of the political spectrum debated not just the abuse of power, but the frightening realization that if an FBI director wasn't safe, who was? Protesters gathered outside the Monument Valley Police Department. The mayor of the small town where the officers had been stationed issued a public apology. But Darius didn't want apologies. He wanted change. He also wanted to go home. But home didn't feel the same now. When he stepped through the front door of his two-story house in the suburban hills outside Sacramento, Simone met him with tear-streaked cheeks and arms that held him for longer than he expected. Miles, their 15-year-old son, hovered at the top of the stairs, his eyes red. Not from crying, Darius realized, but from rage. "I saw the video," Miles said quietly. "I showed it to my civics teacher." Darius blinked. "What did he say?" Miles's voice cracked. "He said, 'Wow, that could have gone worse. Like that was supposed to make me feel better.'" Darius had no words for that, because it could have gone worse. And they all knew it. That night, after Miles had gone to bed, Darius stood on the back patio, watching the stars. He used to believe in the myth of meritocracy, that if he climbed high enough, proved himself enough, wore the suit sharp enough, and spoke measured enough, he could transcend the assumptions people made about men who looked like him. But last night, on that highway, he was just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the eyes of two white officers whose egos couldn't make room for his badge. Simone came out with 2 mugs of tea. "They've already started dragging your name through the mud on some of the networks," she said gently. "They're saying you must have said something to provoke it, that you were confrontational." Darius laughed, bitter and low. "Confrontational? I said 4 words." He took the mug, hands trembling despite the warmth. "It was never about how I spoke. It was always about the fact that I spoke at all." She sat beside him. "You're going to war, aren't you?" He looked at her, eyes full of something hard and ancient. "I've been at war since I put on this badge. The only difference now is, people finally saw it." The fallout wasn't just personal. Inside the bureau, there were murmurs. Darius began to notice which agents looked him in the eye and which didn't, who offered quiet nods in support and who avoided him in the hallway. But more than that, he saw the lines being drawn. Some agents were terrified. If this could happen to the director, what shield did their own ranks offer? Others were defensive, angry at the implication that law enforcement could ever be so wrong, so violent, so exposed. Darius didn't try to convince them. He didn't have time. Instead, he called together a task force. Not a symbolic one, not another commission with no teeth. A real one, with subpoena power, public oversight, and its mission written in bold ink. Expose systemic abuse within American law enforcement, especially in rural jurisdictions where scrutiny rarely reached. He called it Operation Mirror. "We're going to make the nation look at itself," he said at its first briefing. "And we're going to start with the badge." As the room quieted and agents took notes and plans were sketched on digital whiteboards, Darius felt something unfamiliar creep into his chest. not fear, purpose. This wasn't the end of his story. This was the beginning of a reckoning. It started with one name on a forgotten form. The moment Agent Sarah Lynn slid the document across Darius Cole's desk, he could feel the shift. The air in the Las Vegas field office was different now, no longer pulsing with reactionary fury, but tightening around a growing sense of purpose. The investigation wasn't just about Officer Ray Dalton and Deputy Mason Keener anymore. It was about the thread they had unknowingly tugged when they stopped a black man in a suit who dared to carry authority they couldn't recognize. The form was a civilian complaint from 18 months prior, filed by a Latino Army veteran named Ernesto Varela. Same officers, same stretch of highway near Red Rock Canyon. Same tactics, an illegal stop, vague, probable cause, and no body cam footage available afterward. Ernesto had filed the complaint 3 times. It was buried every time. Darius scanned the report in silence, his eyes narrowing as each line fed a pattern he was already beginning to recognize. "Find him," Darius said. Within days, Ernesto Varela sat across from Darius and Sarah in a closed conference room, the Nevada desert sun bleeding through the blinds. He spoke in clipped, even tones, his posture straight, years of discipline in his spine. "They pulled me over, said my taillight was cracked. It wasn't. I told them I served. They told me that didn't matter. They searched the car, emptied my duffel bag onto the road, and let me go with no citation." He paused, rubbing the scar on his left hand. "I wrote letters. I called every number they gave me. Nothing happened. So I gave up." Darius leaned forward. "Don't give up now." Ernesto's story cracked open a floodgate. Within 2 weeks, the task force had documented 21 complaints from individuals, all people of color, about Dalton and Keener. Many had been brushed aside by local officials, labeled as misunderstandings or misplaced anger. But now, under federal scrutiny, these accounts carried weight. Sarah built a timeline. Every stop, every dashcam glitch, every suspicious discrepancy. A map began to form on the war room wall, the pins forming a red constellation of abuse. Darius stared at it one evening, long after the others had gone home, his fingers tracing the line of stars across Nevada. They weren't just accidents. They were patterns. The deeper they dug, the worse it got. Dalton's service record, previously held behind layers of departmental red tape, revealed 2 internal investigations from his time in a different county, both dismissed without disciplinary action. One for excessive force, one for falsifying reports. But it was Keener who held the darker secret, a connection to a local heritage group, which at first glance seemed like a patriotic nonprofit, but, upon closer inspection, had online forums steeped in white nationalist rhetoric. His social media was clean, almost too clean, but the encrypted messages recovered from a group chat told the truth. Code words, phrases like cleaning up the desert and holding the line. Darius didn't just feel angry. He felt something more rare, vindicated. For years, he'd tried to explain to fellow agents, to political appointees, to anyone who would listen, that racism in policing wasn't always loud. It was quiet. It wore uniforms and shook hands and smiled during town halls. But now, finally, he had the receipts. The challenge was no longer proving misconduct. It was turning evidence into accountability. One evening, Darius met with U.S. Attorney Naomi Briggs in her office, a space lined with legal texts and framed photos of her 2 daughters. She listened as he outlined the findings, her pen barely touching the notepad. When he finished, she leaned back and exhaled. "You want to go federal," she said. "I want to go systemic," Darius replied. "We indict these officers, yes, but we also charge obstruction for every official who covered for them. We expose the network. We show the country this isn't about two bad apples." Briggs nodded slowly. "You're going to make enemies." "I've already got them," he said. "I'd rather make history." With her backing, the DOJ signed off on grand jury proceedings. Witnesses were called. Subpoenas were issued. The two officers were placed under protective surveillance to prevent evidence tampering. A leak from the state's Attorney General office tried to stall the progress, but the task force moved faster. Then came the moment that no one saw coming. One of the civilian plaintiffs, an indigenous woman named Raina Darkfeather, revealed that she had secretly recorded part of her interaction with Deputy Keener during a roadside stop. The audio was muffled by wind and static, but unmistakable in its tone. "You people think you're above the law now, huh? You're not. Not while I've got a badge." The room fell into silence when the recording was played. Not because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. The words were different, but the message was the same as what Darius had heard echoing through his own windshield that night. This wasn't about crime. It was about control. The FBI's media division prepared for the storm. Darius recorded a statement, measured, powerful, unflinching. It aired on national news alongside clips of protests, interviews with former victims, and calls for the officers' arrests. But Darius didn't stop there. He went back to the neighborhood where Dalton and Keener had patrolled. He knocked on doors. He spoke to people who had grown used to staying silent. He told them, plainly, "You don't have to hide anymore. I see you, and the country sees you now too." The final blow came when Sarah discovered falsified entries in the local police department's data system. Stops listed as warnings that had never been entered into the state database. Paper trails disappeared, footage erased, but someone forgot to clear the server backups. And those backups revealed a horrifying truth. Dozens of stops, none with video, most with victims who never came forward, fearing retaliation. It wasn't just bias. It was a system designed to bury the truth. By the end of that week, the grand jury had what it needed. 23 counts of civil rights violations, 5 counts of evidence tampering, and 2 counts of conspiracy under the RICO Act. Not just against Dalton and Keener, but against a lieutenant, a tech officer, and a sheriff's deputy who had enabled the pattern to persist for years. Darius stood outside the courthouse that Friday, the Nevada sun beating down on his shoulders, and addressed the press not as a victim, but as a leader. This isn't just about a traffic stop. This is about who we are when the cameras aren't rolling. Justice doesn't happen on its own. It takes people willing to rip off the mask, name the problem, and stay in the fight, no matter how ugly it gets. We're not done yet. The crowd was quiet at first. Then someone started clapping, and then another, and then everyone. Darius didn't smile. He didn't feel victorious. He felt ready. Because the next battle, the one he knew was coming, wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about what this country was finally willing to see. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation, a tension so thick it seemed to cling to the paneled walls and polished oak benches. Outside, protesters held signs beneath the Nevada sun, their voices muted but persistent. Inside, The nation's eyes had turned to one man, Special Agent Darius Cole, and the trial that would determine whether justice in America was a symbol or a living force. Ray Dalton sat at the defense table, flanked by his attorneys. His uniform was gone, replaced by a plain charcoal suit that hung slightly off his shoulders. Mason Keener sat beside him, his arms crossed tightly, jaw clenched. Behind them, a half-empty gallery of supporters stared forward, stone-faced. But it was the other side of the room that held the heart of the proceedings. Those who had once been voiceless, now present, now watching. The prosecution began with precision. U.S. Attorney Naomi Briggs stood before the jury, her presence sharp, composed. She didn't waste time with grand rhetoric. Instead, she told them what they already knew. This case is not about one traffic stop. It's about the erosion of trust, the corrosion of power, and the silence that gave it shelter. Her words echoed in the chamber. She introduced the audio from Raina Darkfeather, the bitter hiss of Keener's voice laced with disdain. She played the dash cam footage, or what remained of it, with deliberate pauses on the cutouts, the suspicious glitches, the precise moments when recording should have captured everything and showed nothing. And then she called Darius Cole to the stand. He walked forward slowly, left arm in a sling, still healing from that night. His suit was immaculate. His voice, steady but subdued, filled the room not with anger, but with clarity. He described the moment the lights hit his rearview mirror, the barrel of the gun inches from his temple, the sting of being told to "get out, boy," as if he were a threat rather than the highest-ranking federal agent in the state. But what struck the jury wasn't just the detail. It was his restraint. Darius didn't speak to punish. He spoke to expose. He laid bare the system. He explained the patterns, the buried complaints, the falsified reports, the encryption-protected group chats, the coded language designed to dehumanize and justify. They weren't just stopping people like me, Darius said, his voice catching slightly. They were testing how far silence could go, and for a while, it went far. But we're here now, because silence ended. The defense tried to paint a different story. They spoke of split-second decisions, of uncertain circumstances, of the pressures of law enforcement in a region strained by drug trafficking and gang activity. They called it a misunderstanding, a coincidence, a mistaken judgment, not a pattern of abuse. But that narrative cracked when the jury heard from the others. Ernesto Varela, who stood in uniform and said quietly, "They treated me like I was the enemy." Raina Darkfeather, who refused to cry on the stand, but stared straight at Keener and said, "You wanted to humiliate me, but I'm still here." And then, quietly, from the back of the gallery, a woman stood up and handed over an envelope. Inside were records from a rural police precinct, dozens of unfiled complaints dismissed by a deputy with ties to Keener's militia group. Another thread pulled, another mask falling away. When Briggs delivered her closing argument, her voice was calm, even maternal in tone. The law does not bend for fear. It does not protect power. It protects people. All people. And when those entrusted to uphold it betray that trust, it is not just their failure. It is ours if we do nothing. The courtroom was silent as the jury retired. For 4 hours, the city held its breath. And then they returned. Guilty. Guilty on all counts. Civil rights violations, obstruction, conspiracy. The judge's gavel slammed like thunder through the hall. Dalton blinked, his jaw slack, while Keener shook his head in slow disbelief. Outside, the crowd erupted. not in chaos, but in cathartic relief. Applause, tears, chants of accountability now filled the air. But Darius didn't cheer. He stepped quietly out of the courthouse, the sun warming his face. He looked up, not at the cameras, but at the flag above the courthouse, fluttering in the wind. He thought of his father, who had once told him, "The measure of a man isn't in how loud he speaks, but in what he stands silent for." And Darius had chosen not to stand silent anymore. Justice, he knew, was not a finish line. It was a choice, made again and again in rooms like this, in voices like his, in stories like Reina's and Ernesto's. Today, the system had looked itself in the mirror and blinked. But tomorrow, the work would begin again. 6 months had passed since the verdict. The courthouse steps no longer echoed with chants, and the headlines had long shifted to new scandals, new battles. But in quiet corners of the country, the story of Darius Cole still flickered like a flame that refused to die. In Washington, D.C., at a modest podium beneath the rotunda of the Capitol, Darius stood once again, not as a victim, not even solely as an FBI director, but as a voice for something larger than himself. His shoulder, though healed, still bore a faint ache that reminded him of the cost. Yet his voice held no trace of resentment, only resolve. He had been invited to testify before the Justice and Civil Liberties Oversight Commission. What had begun as a courtroom drama in Nevada had sparked a national reckoning. Departments across the country were being audited, internal policies rewritten, civilian review boards strengthened. The Justice Department launched a task force to address racial profiling and misuse of power, and Darius was asked to co-chair it. But beyond the policy shifts and legislative motions, a deeper impact was growing. Quiet, often unseen, but vital. Raina Darkfeather had returned to her job at the Tribal Council in Pyramid Lake. She no longer avoided eye contact with officers. Instead, she had partnered with local schools to teach workshops on constitutional rights and de-escalation. "I don't want revenge," she told a local news crew. "I want knowledge. I want our kids to walk tall." Ernesto Varela left the sheriff's department, but not policing. He moved to Santa Fe and joined a program mentoring at-risk youth. He now spoke openly about his experience, sometimes to rooms full of hesitant cadets, teaching them not how to carry a weapon, but how to carry accountability. And Darius? He stayed at the FBI, though he declined a promotion to deputy director. Instead, he requested a reassignment to internal affairs, focusing on reform from within. "If I walk away," he told his wife one evening over dinner, "then I leave the door open for the next officer like Dalton, and someone else's life gets torn apart." He had also begun writing a book, not about what had been done to him, but about the long arc of justice and the people who quietly bent it towards something better. Its working title was After the Sirens, not a memoir, but a meditation on systems, on silence, and on the people who risk everything just to be heard. He returned to Elko just once more. It was a still September morning. No media, no press. Just him and a local artist named Tanya Wu, standing in front of a new mural on the side of the county library. It showed a silhouette of a black man holding a badge, not in power, but in protection. His shadow forming a shelter for a group of children drawn in bold colors beneath him. Tanya had painted it after the trial. "Justice," she said, "isn't loud. It's steady." And Darius had nothing to add. He only nodded, his hands in his coat pockets, eyes misting not with sadness, but with something gentler. a kind of peace. But legacy is not just in the lives transformed, it is in the culture shifted. Newsrooms across the country began reviewing how they covered police violence, moving away from passive language. Schools adopted parts of Darius's testimony as curriculum. Even the FBI itself rolled out a new initiative, the Cole Doctrine, requiring implicit bias training at every level and mandating third-party investigations for incidents involving use of force. Still, not all was victory. There were threats. There were doubters. There were those who called him a traitor, who said he had embarrassed the badge, not honored it. But Darius didn't flinch. He had learned that legacy isn't defined by applause or condemnation. It's defined by impact, by the quiet moment when a young officer chooses not to escalate, when a black teenager knows how to assert his rights calmly, when a courtroom listens without presumption, when a community dares to believe it matters. One evening, Darius stood at the back of a small church in South Houston, where his father had once preached. A new plaque had been installed in the foyer, in honor of those who speak, even when their voices shake. Below it, etched in bronze, were the names of not heroes, but survivors. As the choir hummed low and warm, Darius looked out at the pews, at elders, at teenagers, at parents holding sleeping children, and he realized something profound. Justice had never truly been about punishment. It had always been about presence. And finally, he was fully present in a country still learning how to be just. Darius Cole's story is more than the chronicle of a high-ranking black FBI director wrongfully stopped at gunpoint. It's more than the trial of a racist officer, more than the exposure of a broken system. His story is a journey through the gut-wrenching corridors of institutional injustice and a masterclass in resilience, integrity, and the relentless pursuit of truth in the face of power designed to suppress it. It began on an empty desert highway outside of Elko, Nevada, under the indifferent wash of moonlight. One routine drive turned into a terrifying standoff where a man who had spent his life upholding the law suddenly found himself on the wrong side of a loaded gun simply because of the color of his skin. That moment, a blur of sirens, suspicion, and silence cracked open a much deeper truth. Justice in America isn't equally distributed. Not by the badge, not by the court, not even by the public that claims to stand for liberty. The fallout came fast. A viral video, a media storm, the threat of suspension, then expulsion. His integrity was questioned. His family was scrutinized. His name dragged through whispers and headlines alike. Yet Darius did not flinch. He chose not to retreat into quiet compliance or defend himself with rage. Instead, he chose the long road, evidence gathering, relentless documentation, and trusting that truth, however slow, would rise. And it did. When Officer Dalton Parker took the stand, when the trial revealed a web of manipulated reports, doctored footage, and racial profiling masked as routine procedure, the public could no longer look away. But the greatest victory wasn't just Parker's conviction. It was the shift in perception. The moment people understood that even those at the highest level could be victims of racial bias, and that silence was complicity, Darius went further. Instead of retiring or withdrawing, he recommitted himself to systemic change. Through policy, mentorship, and personal example, he became a catalyst, co-chairing reform committees, rebuilding trust inside federal agencies, and helping spark change across the country. Not through vengeance, through vision. His journey, though, wasn't without cost. He bore the emotional scars of betrayal, the personal ache of seeing his loved ones targeted, the trial, the headlines, the protests. None of them gave him back the peace he once had. But he learned that peace and comfort are not the same thing. Peace is knowing you've done what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. So what can we take from Darius Cole's story? We learn that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the insistence on moving forward despite it. That change doesn't come from yelling the loudest, but from standing the longest. That justice, if left unchecked, will always bend toward the comfortable unless we push it, together, toward the equitable. We also learn that speaking up matters. Whether you're in a boardroom or a backseat, whether you wear a uniform or fear one, your truth matters. And telling it over and over, in whatever way you can, chips away at a system that prefers your silence. Let Darius's story be a mirror, a map, and a call to action. If his story inspired you, if you believe in stories that expose injustice and uplift those fighting to change it, then take a moment right now to subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light. Stories that shake the silence and remind us all what we're capable of when we refuse to be invisible. Hit that subscribe button, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that truth is louder than fear. And above all, keep watching, keep questioning, and keep standing tall. The fight for justice is far from over, but together, we're just getting started.